Ramesh Deshpande is a very good friend of mine, and he knows Dr. Deshmukh very well. I have attended Dr. Deshmukh's talks also, sessions in person. It's nice that he's accepted the invitation to give us a session on Shri Yoga, and so thanks to Ramesh Deshpande to introduce him.
Oh, thank
So
you.
go ahead.
Thank you. I think it is indeed a privilege to have Dr. Deshmukh to speak to us this afternoon. Dr. Deshmukh, MD, PhD, is a retired neurologist from Jacksonville, Florida. He was an associate professor of neurology at the University of Florida. He also had his own private practice at Flagler Hospital in St. Augustine, Florida. It was in January this year, Dr. Deshmukh was awarded an honorary degree of Doctor of Science by S. Vyasa University, Swami Vivekananda Yoga University in Bangalore. You may be aware that S. Vyasa is dedicated to the study of yoga based on teachings of Swami Vivekananda. Dr. Deshmukh's recent scientific book, The Astonishing Brain and Holistic Consciousness, Neuroscience and Vedanta Perspectives, was published in 2012 by Nova Science Publishers in New York. Besides, Dr. Deshmukh has published over 60 scientific articles, including a monograph on brain blood flow. His recently published articles were on such topics as neuroscience of meditation, multi-stream self, turiya, the fourth state of consciousness, prana dhyana, Vedic psychology as a science of wisdom, and the cognitive pause and unload, the CPU hypothesis of meditation and creativity. So you can see the range of topics he has handled over the years. Since his retirement in 2007, Dr. Deshmukh has given about 30 invited lectures or talks on brain and mind, yoga and meditation in different parts of the world. His last two talks were in Yantra and Vaibhava Summit conferences organized by Minhans in Bangalore in October 2020. I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in the audience in one of those lectures presentations. Poetry, nature photography, oil painting, and nature walks are his hobbies, which all reflect pursuit of spirituality or non-duality. If you see his poems or if you see his paintings, these are the messages that come out of it. He has published over 6 books of his original poetry, essays, and photographs. Please visit his website, which is https://poetmiles.com. I think it is given on the brochure also on circulated for this particular event. As you will see, Dr. Deshmukh is a keen exponent and practitioner of Vedanta. He regularly documents his experiences in meditation, awareness, and consciousness, some of which he was kind enough to share with us. The topic for today's discussion, self-perspective, physical, mental, and holistic, therefore, cannot be more appropriate or relevant, not only for him to talk about, but for all of us who wish to take or stay on the path of Vedanta. Thank you very much, Dr. Deshmukh. With this brief introduction, I mean, we cannot introduce you enough, so the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Ramesh Deshpande for that generous introduction and also Shrikant Sabnis for inviting me. And I really appreciate for him to organize this and inviting me. Today's topic is interesting, and I start with this painting that I did in 2015. And in a way, this painting came to me subconsciously because it's not a copy of anything that I've seen, but it shows you that one source in the, I can show you here. This is one source. And then this is maybe the primary source or what we can call the Atma Surya, the luminosity within us, the divinity within us. This is secondary. This is like the moon. reflected light, reflected consciousness. So this is one, then this becomes two, and all the rest of it becomes many. So my next statement is about conscious life. Conscious life apparently begins with one, becomes two, and then many. On self-reflecting, many become two, then one again. I think I cannot see the full screen, so maybe I need to reduce this.
So we can see the complete slide.
Oh, okay, good. Um, that is the whole of our conscious journey. So noticing where one is at present, one, two, or many. When you are on one, that is Advaita Vedanta. When you are on two, that is like Sankhya, Purush and Prakriti, Shiva Shakti, all that. And many, of course, that we all experience the whole world as multiplicity. So if we really understand that, then we don't need to go any further. But I think we should go further. This is a profound statement by Sri Hanuman, who prayed to Lord Rama. Deha bhavena dasosmi, jiva bhavena tvadanshakaha, atma bhavena tvamevaham iti me nishchita matihi. When I pursue myself as the physical body, I am your devotee. When I act like an individual person, I am an integral part of you. And when I feel I am the Atman itself, I am really you. This is my firm conviction. This is a profound statement. It summarizes so many profound ideas and experiences. This is one of my recent journal entry, November 14th. 3 aspects of my existential being. Physical being is the organism, mental being is mentation or mind, and holistic being is the sentience or awareness itself. Self as me, mine, autobiographical self. Self as I am this agent or experiencer, and self as the existential being. Holistic self-aware life or itself is the life itself, is the feeling of life itself, the feeling of consciousness itself. So it is only one, non-dual, and we will talk more about it. People all over the world in all different disciplines, including now neuroscience, are trying to come to grips with this division between body and mind. This is a recent article published 2020. They are talking about unus mundus, one world. This idea was based on Carl Jung's idea of one mind, one universe, one world, which integrates body and mind together. So even the quantum physicists and the neuroscientists are trying to bridge this gap between the body and mind and consciousness. Here is another attempt by Fingal-Kurtz, Physics of Life Reviews. What they are saying that this IPST, which is internal physical space-time, OST is the operational space-time, and PST is the phenomenal space-time. And all these are electromagnetic fields. So what they are saying that one electromagnetic field emerges or is embedded in another electromagnetic field. And what is happening is that operational space-time acts like a module field that integrates the electromagnetic field within the body and the electromagnetic field outside the body together as a single entity. And they talk about emergentism. I'll show you some more of their work in further slides. Here's another attempt to come to grips with the universal field. He calls it the ubiquitous field of consciousness. See? Ubiquitous field of consciousness. And this is the individual organismic field of consciousness. And there is interaction between these two fields and a sort of synchrony or synergy, which then creates a complex conscious state or mental state. And these are actual published papers. This was published in 2020, Kepler and Shani. Then, of course, one of the prominent theory about consciousness is what is called the global workspace theory or global neuronal workspace theory, where it's like a single field which integrates evaluative systems, attentional systems, motor output, perceptual systems, and long-term memory. All this somehow is integrated together. And then there is what these authors call ignition. I think ignition is a kind of crude word, as if it's a spark plug in the car or something. I think better word is instantiation. Instantiation means something that happens instantly, instantaneously. And that's exactly what happens. What they are saying, once this integration occurs, then that information is broadcasted to the whole field, to the whole cortex. And then you are conscious of that particular event or particular object. Here is another attempt. Now, these authors are talking about a 0-point field, which is the resting field, energy field, which is in the vacuum, so-called vacuum field in physics, quantum physics. So 0-point field, which is omnipresent, inherently sentient background field. That's what he's saying. And then what he's saying is that when there is alpha cycle, there is a resting state of the brain. And when there is a gamma cycle, there is some sort of mental activity, like a dream state or a wakefulness with thoughts. Because gamma activity typically occurs in conscious activity, while alpha is mainly like a resting consciousness. Here is another attempt. This article talks about the singularity of the whole nature and what these authors are saying, that the unicellular organisms kind of integrate within themselves the outside molecules, complex molecules, including bacteria, and then which act as biological entities and biological parts which are integrated in the cellular mechanism. They call it endosymbiosis. This is an interesting word, endosymbiosis. And that's how the complex multicellular organisms evolved. For instance, there is incorporation of heavy metals and calcium is kicked out, gases, and again, calcium or positive ions are kicked out, ions, gravity, and bacteria. And this whole thing together then creates a kind of living, conscious, multicellular organism, including human beings. Of course, in ancient history, if you look at Shiva Sutra, they have been talking about this for thousands of years. Chaitanya Mahatma. The self is consciousness. Consciousness is self. Awareness, which is absolute freedom and knowledge and activity. Atma is the self. The real nature of ourselves is consciousness. Now, if you understand that, that is Advaita Vedanta. There is nothing more to talk about. Just live a good life and let others live a good life too. And in fact, people like Ramana Maharshi will say, there are no others. So, Advaita, there are many states like that. Similarly, in Mandukya Upanishad, Atman is defined. In the seventh mantra of Mandukya Upanishad, it clearly tells you the negative aspect first. For example, it is not that which is conscious of the internal subjective world, nor that which is conscious of the external world, nor that which is conscious of both, nor that which is a mass of consciousness, nor that which is simple consciousness, nor is it unconsciousness. It is unseen by the sense organ, beyond empirical dealings, incomprehensible by the mind, uninferable, unthinkable, indescribable, essentially the self itself, negation of all phenomena. But this Atman is peaceful, profoundly peaceful, Shanta, auspicious, Shiva, and non-dual, Advaita. This is what is considered as the fourth or the Turiya. This is Atman, this is to be realized. Profound observation. And the experience of that reality remains the same for thousands of years. It is like experience of gravity. Experience of gravity was the same 3,000 years ago and same now. So it is the absolute truth. I published this article about embodied cognitive systems with exchange of energy, matter, and information, the brain, body, personal environment, and then the world or cosmos or universe. And there is a constant interchange between each level, and it happens instantaneously. It's incredible. There is a lot of exchange between these. It's almost like a single ocean with multiple waves and multiple patterns and changes. One of the model of a living organism, if you consider that as a self-organizing system, open and nested, holistic neurobiological system, bioenergy creates action and emotion, sentience and information creates cognition, thought, memory, and the sense of being or individuality creates ego, volition, intention. All this works together as a single entity, holistic energy, awareness, being. One of the profound facts that unfortunately has been not paid enough attention to in neuroscience. In neuroscience, there is a kind of bias towards cortex. They think cortex is everything and they ignore the brainstem and the reticular activating system. They think it's primitive, reptilian, and all that. But the fact is that is the powerhouse. That is the power that activates the cortex. Without that, cortex is nothing. You can take out the cortex and still the organism is living. So this conscious arousal energy matrix, which is in the reticular activating system in the brainstem, I'll talk about more with this, then the awareness, then attention, and this attention then causes the duality of subject and object, the player and the play. And then this duality creates the whole world of our experience, mind, mentation, thinking, dreaming, ego, affect, cognition, all that. So attention, again, is a very important faculty. We need to understand that. But we are the source of attention. We are not at the tip of the attention. Attention is directed out there. Of course, you can turn it inside. When you turn it inside, then you go to the source. You go to the self. That is the 10th man story. So now this is a very important article, and it's about the evolution of the two aspects of nervous system. Profound. The first one, which is in the red, is the basal system, which is brainstem, hypothalamus, tectum, the non-specific part of the thalamus. This whole system, including the reticular formation system. And you can see this, and the white is the apical cortical system, thalamocortical system. You can see this in rainbow trout, frog, lizard, pigeon, cat, and human beings. What has happened as the evolution occurred, the role of this, the brain part, has increased tremendously. But the cortical part is the computing side, the development of memory, cognition, information processing, the mental activity, mental travel, all these complex functions evolved with the development of the cortex. But the basal system supports all that with essential conscious arousal, awareness, and the conscious being. So it's like the basal system is like the sun within, and the white cortical system is like the reflected moon that reflects all these complex functions. In fact, one of the analogies even in ancient texts, mind is considered as the moon, and the consciousness is considered as the sun. Now, this is a quick way to show in the model that I have. This is medulla, this is pons, this is midbrain, this is called tectum with superior and inferior colliculus. This is tegmentum, where the periaqueductal sylvius. This is aqueduct of sylvius, which is a channel for CSF. And then this is hypothalamus. This is thalamus. This is cerebellum. This is corpus callosum. This is cingulate gyrus. And this is orbitofrontal cortex. And this is whole cortex, you can see. Frontal, parietal, occipital. This is just a quick review of neuroanatomy. Here again, you can see this is pons, medulla, aqueduct of sylvius, tectum, tegmentum, hypothalamus, thalamus. This is caudate nucleus and the cerebellum. This structure is called insula, insular cortex. The front part of the insular cortex is for our sense of body and bodily information. The back part of the insular cortex receives all the bodily information. This is what it's called interoception. Interoception is an important aspect of our sense of being. And the rest of it is the cortex. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. Now, Antonio Damasio has done a lot of very good work. He has published many books and articles. And he's proposed that our sense of self has at least three major aspects. One is the proto self, second is the core self, and the third is the autobiographical self. Proto self is like the homeostatic sense of feelings and sense of being. It's a neural description of relatively stable aspect of the organism. Main product of the proto self is the spontaneous feeling of being alive, being the living body, primordial feelings. He also calls it the homeostatic feelings or spontaneous feelings. When you ask somebody, how do you feel? Oh, I feel great. I'm like $1 million. So that's the overall feeling. It's hard to put it in words, but that's the feeling we have. The core self is the pulse of core self is generated when the proto self is modified by an interaction between the organism and an object. And when, as a result, the images of the objects are also modified. The modified images of the object and organism are momentarily linked in a coherent pattern. The relation between organism and the object is described in a narrative sequence of images, some of which are feeling. So as soon as you see some object, that creates the duality of core self and the object, subject and object. The third stage is the autobiographical self, where the memory comes, all our history comes. That I am so and so, my name is so and so, I was born here and all that, and I did this, and my education and my degrees and whatnot, and I'm married and children, and all this autobiographical history is in the autobiographical self. And that becomes the background for the core self. This is a very interesting article on the evolution of these aspects of self in different vertebrates, including fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and Homo sapiens. What is interesting, the primary self or the proto self is present in all living beings, including fish and frogs, lizards, birds, mammals, and ourselves. Core self is present in reptiles, birds, mammals, and Homo sapiens. Self-consciousness, which is given as a test, if you put a red dot or some dot on your forehead, whether the animal can recognize that or become aware of that. And that test is passed by the birds, mammals, and of course, Homo sapiens. But what is unique about human beings is the development of language, memory, working memory, autobiographical memory, long-term memory. And with working memory, we can hold a piece of information for a duration of time, like 20, 30 seconds, which no other animal can really do. And with that capacity, we can hold one word, or we can count from 1 to 3, 4, like that, and we know how much we counted. We can also travel in time, mental time. Like, oh, lady said 5, so next is 6. Or you can project, lady said 6, so the next is 7. So this is how we sequence the conscious events and mental time travel by our ability for speaking, counting, working memory, intermediate memory, and long-term memory, and development of language. We learn to name things. We name everything. And of course, names are arbitrary. When you call something lion, the word is not lion, word is not the reality of the lion. When you call this glass of water, that is not real glass of water. The reality of glass of water is very different. So the name is a very limited symbolism or representation of the real thing. The description is never the described. Name is never the reality. Unfortunately, but we are so habituated and caught up in words and descriptions that we can't even stop talking and stop naming and stop counting. In meditation, one of the main things we have to do is to stop talking, stop counting, stop naming, stop watching a clock and all that. You have to go beyond all these cognitive functions. That is what I call the cognitive pause and unload. That is my article about. You have to pause for a moment and just be really present to smell the rose and not be preoccupied. This is another recent article describing the proto self. And in this, Panksepp has done a lot of excellent work. Jack Panksepp, Panksepp. He was a veterinary professor of veterinary medicine, but he's wrote the first book called Affective Neuroscience. Great contribution. And his last book was The Archaeology of Mind. Profound. Unfortunately, he passed away, so he's not with us, but he has contributed immensely to the importance of brainstem, reticular activating system, and how they form the foundational consciousness, affective consciousness. In fact, he talks about affective consciousness and cognitive consciousness. Affective consciousness is in the subcortical system, the core systems, brainstem, and the cognitive consciousness more in the cortex with memory and speech and thinking and all that. So the proto self is like the most ancient form of coherent world and self-representation. That is the primary template that organizes the whole organism, the living being. That is the foundational self-organizing principle. We call it Adi Purusha. Jnaneshwar starts with Om Namo Adya, Veda Pratipadya, Jai Jai Swasamvedya Atmarupa. Profound. So that primordial self-sentient conscious being is we are trying to understand and hopefully grasp. And we are that. Tattvamasi, you are that. Now, these brainstem circuits are very important, especially when it is an emergency. For instance, when this mouse notices that there is an eagle up there, he notices the eye, the eagle, and that information goes to superior colliculus in the top of the midbrain, which instantly sends message to periaqueductal gray and which immediately initiates a response like fight or flight. Of course, there's no fight here, but mainly flight or hide somewhere. So these emergency survival type of behaviors are instantaneous. There is no time to think. If you stop to think, you are dead. Because these responses have to be instantaneous. And what is really interesting to understand that in this system, the reticular activating system, things are instantaneous because there are what are called gap junctions. Gap junctions means direct communication between neurons. It's like a single sheet of surface that is entirely connected. So even if something happens in one corner, it instantly goes to the whole surface. It's like a syncytium. The whole reticular activating system acts like a syncytium. That's why it's like a single surface that is instantly in communication with all the different aspects of it, which is phenomenal. That's why the reaction times in the brainstem are very small. This is periaqueductal gray. This MLR stands for Mesencephalic Locomotor Center. This looks like a robot. And then the reticulospinal system and the spinal cord. When there is a real emergency, the whole body has to be activated instantly. I remember when somebody does butterfly swim, it's incredible. The whole thing has to be activated instantly. Or people who do sprint running, you say ready, steady, and as soon as the gun goes, they hear the sound, they jump out. So it's a very fast, instantaneous reaction in those circuits. Similarly, this is another interesting part, that our phonation, producing sound, producing words, producing sound, which I am doing now, phonation, then articulation, and then vocalization, giving meaning, giving emotion to it. So this has at least 3 different levels of organization. The very foundational one is here. This is system 1. Coordination of laryngeal, articulatory, and respiratory activity, control of inert vocalization, reticular formation, phonatory, motor, and sensory nuclei, periaqueductal gray, hypothalamus, midline thalamus, amygdala, red nucleus, preoptic region. All this is system 1, level 1. The second level is the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the limbic system, which gives a sense of emotion, a feeling to it, vocalization, initiation, motivation, control of voluntary emotional vocalization. And lastly, the third system is the voluntary vocal motor control, which is control of the larynx, and then parietal cortex, choosing the right word or right sound, right emphasis, all that. So, but what is interesting in yoga, when we do Brahmari, when we do Dirgha Omkar, we start from here. We start from the source. Then the middle part, then the final part, and we end in the source again. So it's a kind of beginning, middle, and the end. And before the beginning is the source, the resting state. And after the end of vocalization is the resting state again, which is the baseline. And the purpose of doing Brahmari or Dirgha Omkar or ringing the bell, all that is to realize that resting state, which is always there, the resting consciousness, which is always there. Similarly, activities like laughing. People have actually studied laughing, tickling, laughing, and it's initiated in the brainstem, periaqueductal gray. There is a pontine laughter center in the pons and the midbrain, and then it goes to the insular cortex. So you can see how much activity is in the brainstem. All this is brainstem area, subcortical. And then this is cortical area. So people have studied laughter. One of the most effective ways to get back to yourself in the resting state is to breathe out and smile. And just feel what it is like to be at ease with yourself and at home in the world. Just breathe out and smile and be with yourself. Be with the self, the divinity within. This is Panksek's work from his book, Archaeology of Mind. And he also acknowledges there is this reticular activating system with non-specific arousal, acetylcholine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and then the periaqueductal gray. And then he calls the primary emotions like seeking, lust, care, rage, fear, panic, and play. And then the more secondary emotions like shame, guilt, blame, pride, empathy, trust. And then tertiary, which is mindfulness, contentment, mentalization, names of feelings, distancing. All this happens in the neocortex. So there is this hierarchy of processing from the brainstem all the way to the cortex. Brainstem, limbic system, and the cortex. This mystical non-dual experience, Christoph Koch, you may have heard of him. He's a well-known neuroscientist. So now he's talking about sentience. Sentience is present in all living beings. It's part of life itself. His book, he talks about the feeling of life itself. And in that book, he quotes that in this mystical experience, having no content, no sounds, no images, no bodily feelings, no memories, no fear, no desire, no ego, no distinction between the experiencer and the experience, the apprehender and the apprehended. Now, this is his classic description of mystical experience. And let me share one of my experience that I wrote down. This was on November 25, last year, November 25, 20. I woke up naturally, fully refreshed and alert, completely quiet and silent. No speech, no words, no thoughts, no voice, no faces, no other, no memories, no needs or worries, nor any expectations, no sense of achievement or ego, no subconscious suggestions, no will, goal, or direction. All was perfect in itself naturally. It was blissful. No time or duration. No need to count or to describe. Just to write down what is happening endlessly. Incessant, ever fresh, yet the same, self-aware, timeless being. I wrote down just as a sort of memory. Of course, memory is not the real thing. Words are not the real thing. To actually have that feeling, you have to let it happen. You can't count on memory. You can't count on words. And it has happened again and again. It's a spontaneous thing. It does happen. But you can't hold on to it. People have even developed a questionnaire. They call it Mystical Experience Questionnaire. There is internal unity, experience of pure being and pure awareness beyond the world of sense impressions. External unity, experience of oneness or unity with objects and or persons perceived in your surroundings. The noetic quality, certainty of encounter with ultimate reality. And then sacredness, sense of being at a sort of spiritual height, experience of amazement, the awe moment or aha moment, loss of your usual sense of time and space, and sense that experience cannot be described adequately in the words. I just said that. So this is a classical questionnaire that people use for doing research on this subject. You may have heard of Josipovich. Josipovich has done some really good work, and he has described what he calls the non-dual awareness. And I think he has made these very good points, 10 points, which I agree with, and I also quoted in my chapter on meditation. Presence or being, this is perhaps the most obvious of all dimensions of consciousness as such. It is self-evident existence. You can't deny your existence. To deny your existence, you have to exist. Emptiness, no reification, ineffability, can't be described. Non-representational reflexive cognizance. It knows itself. You don't need another knower to know that. The sun doesn't need another light to illuminate it. Luminosity or radiance. It is luminous by itself. There is bliss, profound peace. It is non-dual, there is no other. There is a sense of oneness or unity. It is limitless. It doesn't have any age or boundary. You can't say that it finishes here. It's like the profound silence. You can't say my silence has ended there, or the cosmic silence begins there. It's like a silence mind listening to silence. So what do you do? Silence mind listening to silence. Where is the boundary? Where is the age? Singularity or unity, homogeneous unity of dimensions. It is continuous, unchanging self-sameness. Jnaneshwar defined it or said it beautifully. He says, Atma Prabha Nicha Navi. It is the light within that is ever fresh, ever new. It's like an eternal spring, timeless spring. That is always new, and still it is always there. And self as aware presence, singular and continuous. This is not a self in the usual sense of constructed self. Yet non-dual awareness is not someone else's awareness or an object fundamentally different from oneself. Rather, it is who one is and has always been, as the conscious presence in all of one's experiences, an intrinsic reflexive knowing. One of the statements I made in my book in Marathi, I said, Sarekshan Sarkets. Please pardon me, I'm getting a lot of light from the window, so I had to draw the curtain a little bit, just a second. Okay, this is better. So, Sarekshan Sarkets, that means all experiences, all moments of experiences are the same. You will say, how can they be same? Now, it depends on your vantage point. If you are at the periphery, then of course, every experience is different. This experience of water is different. This experience of this book is different. But if you look at the source, if your vantage point is at the very source of your consciousness, conscious being, then all experiences are the same. So in that sense, if you function from the source, then all experiences are the same. Dr. Travis, he's of course one of at the TM Transcendental Meditation Program. He has published a lot, done a lot of research. And one of his articles, he talks about the 4 states of consciousness. And this is like a 2x2 setting: waking, dreaming, sleeping, and pure consciousness. And in waking, of course, there are thoughts. Dreaming and waking, there are thoughts. There are no thoughts in sleeping and pure consciousness. Self-awareness, there is no self-awareness in dreaming and sleeping, but there is self-awareness in waking and pure consciousness. And in my articles, I had said that REM sleep and REM waking, that means with the wandering mind, is like a REM state, rapid eye movement state. And non-REM sleep is this sleeping. And non-REM means you don't have wandering eyes or wandering mind in pure consciousness. There is absolute inner stillness, silence, and serenity within you. And that is pure consciousness. Shanta, Shanta Udita. You are fully alert. You are not asleep. You are fully alert, but completely at peace and at rest with yourself. Shanta Udita. This is an interesting observation of what is called microarousal. This is an EEG done during non-REM sleep. Non-REM means sleepless, dreamless sleep. So the person is completely asleep, and in the middle of it, just for 5 seconds, there is this microarousal. For 5 seconds, everything is kind of aroused. And you can see that the EEG frequencies, instead of being in the theta and delta range, which is 4 to 6 cycles per second, is go to 8 or 10 cycles per second, hertz. So from this foundational baseline, there is a microarousal. And of course, if you dream, then it becomes even more. And if you are awake, then the frequency increases even more. This is an interesting thing that this MW means mind wandering, OM means open monitoring, and FA means focal attention. So these are different ways of meditation. Mind wandering is the normal state. V means visual, A means auditory, and S means somatosensory. So our mind is kind of full of all this stuff that goes on and on and on endlessly. When you do open monitoring, there is certain order to it. We notice it, we are aware of it. And when we have focused attention or concentration, then we have minimal phenomenal contents in the mind, just one or two things, like just the awareness of breath or awareness of some mantra or name or image or whatever you are meditating on. And of course, in meditation, this distance between this one stimulus and the next even increases. There are periods of complete silence where there is nothing. There is nothingness. One of the profound statements by J. Krishnamurti is, in that moment of nothingness, everything is. In that moment of nothingness, everything is. So, in Vedanta also, there is a state called Amanibhav, no mind consciousness. Mano drushyamidam dvaitam yatkinchat sacharacharam manaso hi amani bhave dvaitam naiva upalabhyate. Whatever that is perceived in this world, movable or immovable, is nothing but the perceptions of the mind, antakarna, mana buddhi ahankarani chitta, is nothing. For plurality is not perceived when the mind is transcended. We have to transcend this antakarna or mind, which I may call it the transmental awareness. We have to go beyond mind, beyond speech, beyond memory, beyond mind, beyond secondary or provoked emotions, beyond duality. That is Amanibhav. One point here is, there is a confusion, one of the sources of confusion between the Western literature and the Eastern literature is the definition of mind. If you look for the definition of mind in psychology, I got the Dictionary of Psychology, American Psychological Association. And the broad definition, of course, mind includes everything, including psyche, self, everything. And then they talk about more narrowed definition, which is then conation or intentionality, cognition or thinking, and affection or emotion. In Vedanta or Eastern tradition, it is called antakarana, which is like an internal instrument, which includes mana, which is mentation or cognition, buddhi is intelligence, decision-making, ahankara is ego, and chitta is memory and all the memory-related thinking and processing. So, with this definition, it is possible to go beyond it. So that is why it's called no mind consciousness or Amanibhav. Transmental awareness, transmental consciousness. This is the statement by J. Krishnamurti. April 24, 1975. Thought cannot hold this moment, for this moment is not of time. This moment is the ending of time. Time has stopped at that moment. There is no movement at that moment. And so it is not related to another moment. It has no cause and so no beginning and no end. Consciousness cannot contain it. In that moment of nothingness, everything is. Meditation is the emptying of consciousness of its content. Amani bhav, going beyond mind, beyond memories, beyond speech, beyond thought, which is very hard to do because we are so used to it. We think if I stop talking, I may die. If I stop thinking, I may not be alive. As if to be alive, you try to keep on talking or keep on thinking. But that is false. We can pause. You can stop talking. You can stop saying things to others as well as to yourself internally. It's your choice. You can learn to do that. It's not easy, but you can. You can stop talking. You can stop thinking. You can stop reminiscing, recalling, and come to the moment in the present moment. Be fully present. That is what I call presence. One of the statements in my book, Presence, is the observed ever changes. Everything that we observe is changing. The observable observer also changes. But the integrate presence is change-free. Integrated presence is free of change. It is always there. That is our consciousness. That is Chaitanya Mahatma. That is Atma Bhava. This is another interesting article published by Fingal Kurtz. What they did, they looked at the EEG, electroencephalography, and they measured the alpha activity, which is 8 to 13 cycles per second, in the parietal area, left parietal area, right parietal area, parieto-occipito-temporal actually, and the frontal area. And they chose 8 experienced meditators and asked them to voluntarily be in different states of consciousness. Like talk to yourself, narrative self or narrative thinker. Keep thinking or talking to yourself about some story from your lifetime. Keep talking. And in second state, stop talking about all that. Here is your body awareness, bodily me. Think of your body, different parts, scan your body, and then stop scanning your body. Forget about your body. And then here, be yourself. Be present. The self as the witness consciousness, Sakshi Bhav. So what they found, see, this is the self state, this is me state, and this is I state. And see the difference between the two states. This is upregulation, that means thinking about that particular mental state. And this is downregulation, means not thinking about it. And they could show the difference between the two states in these meditative volunteers. Recording alpha rhythm and integrating, calculating, showing the difference between the two. So we can change our brain state, our electrical activity of the brain, our mind, based on our intentions. We can do that. It's a skill to do it. Now, talking about skills, this is about evolution of vertebrates and primates. And you can see millions of years. This x-axis is the millions of years. And y-axis is the cranial capacity of the brain, how big the brain became. And you will notice that this red arrow is the one when the primates started using stones and objects as instruments. Stone to break things, break the coconut, or break some fish bone or whatever. So when the organism started using instruments, their brain capacity and their complex brain activity increased enormously. Here, for instance, the chimpanzee remained about the same here, but the human beings progress all the way to here, Homo sapiens, and hopefully we'll go even further. Now, what is interesting in this paper is that in the brain, we not only map our body, but we map our instruments we are using and the situation we are in. We not only map ourselves, but we map our surroundings, the tools we are using, what we are working on. Like if you are cutting a piece of cheese, then we not only map our own body, hand, the knife, and the piece of cheese and the surrounding things. So self in the world is mapped. The self in the situation is mapped in the brain. And here you can see the map like foot, leg, arm, trunk, hand, digits, lower lip, upper lip, all this mapping of the body and the surroundings, this was actually measured and documented in primates. And the same thing happens in human beings. We call it the homunculus. But it's Wilder Painfield, who was the one who inspired me to go into neuroscience, famous neurosurgeon from Montreal Institute, Canada. So he actually operated on epileptic patients when they were fully conscious in local anesthesia. And he mapped out all these homunculi, both sensory homunculus, motor homunculus, and the primal being on the human brain surface. He was the pioneer. Here are his maps. This is the motor homunculus. Again, you will notice that the size of the organ depends on its use. How much the brain part is dedicated to that function depends on its use. More for the speech, more for the hand than for the back. Things like that. It's very, very important. This is motor homunculus and the sensory homunculus. What is interesting that this homunculus or the human form is present even in the embryonic disc. Even when we are an embryo, even that time there are regions of the embryonic disc which are dedicated to the head, the arms, the legs, the torso, even at that stage. So they call it the bow plan or the body plan, even at that time. Now we know about our body through outside perception, inside perception. The inside perception is by proprioception, interoception, vestibular input, and then the memory of the body. All this information is integrated. And that's what we have, the awareness of the body. Then we have both the sensory and motor aspect. For instance, in motor, this is primary motor, this is secondary motor area, and this is the tertiary motor area. This is primary sensory, secondary sensory, and tertiary sensory. And The primary areas process very concrete things. Secondary areas little more complex, and the tertiary areas are the most complex, most abstract, like our goals, like our sense of self, being, all that is very complex, abstract. This is another interesting article. Our sense of self, self-identification depends on these blue areas: premotor cortex, insular cortex, intraparietal sulcus. And the self-location, sorry, let me go back. The self-location is in the posterior cingulate cortex, intraparietal sulcus, and temporoparietal junction. So there are specific areas that process these experiences in the human brain, and of course the primate brain. These are the areas. How do we know self and the other? We know that angular gyrus, supramarginal gyrus, and the Wernicke's area. In this region, we have the duality of self and the other, me and you, or me and this. So that's what, this is the region that is involved in. Similarly, there is a hierarchy in motor output or motor expression. The very basic level is just simple movement. Then there is premotor programming, which is sensory motor control. Then contextual control, in which your response depends on what happened just recently. And then there is schematic control, in which you have some sort of long-term goal, a plan, which defines all this. So there is this hierarchy even in motor expression. Now, this is just published article in which he defines it, he calls it the who system. The profound question we ask in Vedanta, who am I? So the who system he defines, but his who he mainly defines it as the narrative self, the one who talks, one who speaks and communicates by language. He doesn't go any further or deeper than that. It's like conversation between you and me. So at this level, he defines it, these red areas, emotional appraisal and other perception, like other person's face, voice, and emotion. Then green areas are the mentalizing system, narrative hub, theory of mind, theory of mind, theory of mind. And reading other person's mind. Is he a friend or is he a foe? Does he mean well or does he mean something bad? And these decisions are made instantaneously. If there is some danger coming to you, you naturally act instantaneously. Similarly, in the cingulate gyrus, this is the emotional brain, anterior cingulate, which mainly processes the emotional output. This back part is the emotional input or perception. And then middle part, you make the emotional decision and communicate it to the motor cortex and further out. I don't want to go into too many details because it gets technical. This is another way that we are continuously creating a combined percept of the body and the world. We have self-consciousness and world consciousness. So we have this exteroception, awareness of the world. We receive information from it and we act on the world. Similarly, we have the body. We receive information from the body and we act on the body. And we create a combined percept of the body in the world. And there are many levels, of course. This is the subcortical level, hypothalamus, brainstem, and the spinal cord. And this is the cortical level, including limbic system. Now, this is the famous reticular activating system. But it not only activates, but it also creates the pattern in the cortex. It's like a river that as it flows, it takes shape, or the volcano that erupts and then takes shape depending on the environment, or the river of gold that becomes into various ornaments, or the electricity that becomes light and fan. See? Because this arousal, conscious arousal, is non-specific in the beginning. It can be anything. It can be speech, it can be movement, it can be perception, it can be emotion. It is like the fountain within, as I told you. And this is also has excitatory and inhibitory area in which this can be calmed down or excited. So there are mechanisms that can increase or decrease this conscious arousal, emotion, and mentation. Fascinating. This is a recent paper on reticular activating system in which what they are showing, see, this is the brainstem, hypothalamus, thalamus, basal forebrain, and the cortex. This is basal ganglia. What they are saying that this reticular activating system is like a pyramid. This is the very foundational level. This is the next level, higher level, higher level, higher level. This is what they call the parabrachial nucleus. I'll come to that. And at each level, there is excitation and inhibition. So there is like an accelerator and a brake at each level. Now you can chop off the top levels and the organism can function. But if you chop off the bottom level, the foundation, the whole thing will collapse. You lose consciousness, you become comatose if you chop off the foundational level. This is the smallest coma-producing lesion in the parabrachial nucleus of the brainstem. See, I showed you, this is pons, this is midbrain, this is tectum, tegmentum, and the parabrachial nucleus is here. This is the smallest region which has been correlated with coma-producing patients who are in the comatose state. This is the most common region that was in all patients who were comatose. This study was published from Mass General Hospital, Harvard Med School. This, Wilder Painfield had a dream. He even coined a term called centrencephalic system. And he tried to define it, but that time we didn't know all the structures in it. He just pointed out to it. Now we know the different structures. In the very center of the brain, very center of the upper brainstem, like midbrain and the diencephalon, or the hypothalamus, thalamus, and the midbrain. I don't want to go into too many details. I'm going to share all these slides with you so you can read it leisurely. But the main structures are parabrachial nucleus, periapical gray, superior colliculus, ventral tegmental area, hypothalamus, and thalamus central. Now, this conscious arousal has multiple structures involved in it. And any kind of performance, whether it is doing math or writing an essay or public speaking or perceiving, problem solving, any kind of psychological performance depends on good arousal. If the arousal is very low, your performance is poor. If it is very high, your performance is poor. It has to be in the middle, like optimal arousal. So you don't want to be hyperactive and you don't want to be dozing off to sleep. Like Sattva Raja Tama, you can bring that here. Sattva is the optimum. Tama is like drowsiness and sleepiness, lack of energy. And Raja can be hyperactive. One recent article is about stimulating the auricular branch of the nerve, vagus nerve, in the ear. They electrically stimulated the auricular branch of the vagus nerve. And what they showed that it stimulated the tractus solitarius and also locus ceruleus, raphe nuclei, brainstem, reticular activating system, and the whole cortex. And that helped in some of the semi-conscious or drowsy patients who became more alert and more awake. So it's a fascinating thing that there is an auricular branch of the vagus nerve in the ear that can be stimulated electrically. Now, of course, there are many complex neurons and nuclei involved in the brainstem, and I don't want to go into details of it. But one of the points I want to make is that through the retina, we receive light, and this stimulates an area called preoptic nucleus and of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This pathway is called retinohypothalamic pathway. And then this stimulates all these other orexin, locus ceruleus. So this suprachiasmatic nucleus is the master clock for sleep-wake cycle, for feed-fasting cycle. So it is the master clock. And our wakefulness depends on that. If you destroy that, you will be totally out of sync with day and night and fasting. And see, this is the light falling on retina, master clock, suprachiasmatic nucleus. There are metabolic hypothalamus, metabolic brainstem, cerebellum, and these are all secondary clocks. And the whole thing works together as a single entity, believe it or not. It's a great puzzle, a great wonder. Now, the sleep-wake cycle and the feeding and fasting phase has been defined as called the two-process model. What are the two processes? The one process is what they call the circadian gating, like the light-dark cycle, day-night cycle, sleep-wake cycle. And then the homeostatic drive is the metabolic cycle, fasting, feeding cycle. And depending upon whether you are a nocturnal animal or a diurnal animal, these cycles will work and your behavior will depend on that. Some animals go for hunting for food at night, some go for hunting for food during the day. This is the non-REM sleep promoting pathway. REM sleep promoting pathway, believe it or not, all this has been defined and they can be measured. It can be monitored in animal experiments. Now, this is another interesting part. Here, the authors define the question, how long does it take for us to become conscious of something? And does this conscious awareness, does it happen when all the sensations are brought together, integrated? Or does it happen when the information is broadcasted from the cortex? See, 100 to 200 milliseconds, this is the sensory input. From visual cortex, it goes here. Now, do we perceive this in 100 to 200 milliseconds after the stimulus? Or does it happen after it goes to the frontal cortex and it integrates with the perceptual areas, and then the bulb lights up, the tube light lights up, and the information is broadcasted to the whole brain, and we know it. And this takes 300 to 600 milliseconds. Fascinating work. This is a simple, how does the breathing start and how does the breathing become a rhythmical activity? In the beginning, this is a silent network. Then some neurons start firing, integrating randomly, and they kind of link together and create a rhythmogenic kernel. And then it gains momentum. It becomes like a network, participating neurons, and it creates a rhythmic amplitude like that, rhythmic breathing. It depends upon the sodium ionic flow and the calcium ionic flow. This is very basic fundamental work, but it's interesting. Here I briefly want to talk about what is called eudaimonia. Eu means good, daimon means the attending person or the genius or the guiding angel or the deity within. And eudaimonia means feeling well, feeling natural, feeling of well, this wellness. And this requires 6 different factors: autonomy, personal growth, self-acceptance, purpose in life, environmental mastery, and positive relationships. Even Aristotle talked about that. He coined the term eudaimonia. There is even an article on eudaimonia in which they brought Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the observer of body, mind, and environment. Prakriti is the gunas, conditions or interactions like sattva, raja, tama. And the proper balance, optimum balance of trigunas gives us the feeling of wellness or well-being. This is one of my favorite from Adi Shankaracharya, talking about Advaita Vedanta. He says, Upadhi vilayat Vishnu, nirvishesham vishet munihi, jale jalam viyat vyomni, tejas tejasivayatha. On letting go of this limited self-perspective, the sage merges in the non-specific, blissful existential being, like water in water, space in space, or light in light. That is Advaita Vedanta. Couple of my journal entries talked about one peaceful mind. Resting consciousness is holistic, non-dual. From it emerges witness-event duality with limited individual experience. Resting consciousness is the source and sink of all conscious and subconscious events and experiences. It has infinite potential for creativity. And finally, the oneness or holistic consciousness and self, holistic mind, holistic action, perception, holistic life, holistic existence, experience, holistic being, I amness, we are that oneness, that wholeness. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was all excellent, but very high level for me.